listed on the front page of missionks.org. Would you please stand and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Audrey, would you please call roll?
Davis.
Present.
Here.
Here.
Green. Rockwell.
Here.
Schwarzmacher. Here. Thomas. Here. Thank you.
Did we have the, you are now being recorded? I didn't hear that, so. Okay, all right. We do have a revised agenda for tonight's meeting, so I would entertain a motion to approve our revised agenda.
Mr. Mayor, I move that we approve the revised agenda as presented.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Moving on to item 1 of our agenda, we do not have any public hearings tonight, so we will move on to special presentations. First up, first presentation is a legislative update with Little Government Relations from Stuart Little and Mallory Lutz. Please come forward.
Thank you, Mayor. Members of the council. My name is Stuart Little. I'm here at the Little Government Relations in Topeka, and we wanted to thank you, Mayor, and Ms. Smith for the work you all helped us with this legislative session, and we want to thank you for continuing to allow us to work with you and your sister cities here in Northeast Johnson County on legislative and policy issues. We're going to talk about some of the big picture highlights from the 2021 legislative session in some detail if you want. We're happy to take questions. If we don't have answers, we'll get back to you. And then talk a bit about what's going on in the interim committee time and then submissions that are what to expect in 2022. We're about 2 months after the end of the regular wrap up of the regular legislative session. So in some ways we are going to give you a little bit of a summary. You have three documents from us. One was the June 8th report, which is essentially a summary of legislation when we testified, covered all those issues at the time. You also received an outline of what we'll be discussing tonight, and then a report that we just completed for the month of July and sent over yesterday, which is more forward, prospective, looking at some of the issues. And some of the things we're following have even changed literally in the last hour. So we'll give you some updates on those topics. What is normally otherwise a slow time, there are still things kind of happening all the time. When we're going to give you the highlights of the 2021 legislative session, there are a couple things that are important to always keep in mind. We are, after the 20 the composition of the legislature changed. There were shifts in the numbers of the partisan shifts within the legislature, and that had an impact on some of the legislation that passed, had a significant impact on the number of vetoes. I think this is the most vetoes we've dealt with in decades in Topeka, and overrides of vetoes and failed vetoes. And so that made it a much more interesting session. Obviously, COVID transitions through the course of the legislative session. And one thing to keep in mind
this past session. Last week, I'm sure you saw in the news, Johnson County District Court ruled that bill unconstitutional. And then on the ride over, the Attorney General has asked the judge to delay his order on it. So there is a lot of uncertainty going forward with the changes that were made. I'm not sure how that is going to shake out, but we would note that this high level of uncertainty is the kind of thing that makes lawmakers maybe a little antsy and thinking about a special session. So wouldn't be surprised if we have some conversations about that. One other thing, not exactly related to KEMA, but kind of in that same realm, you'll recall Senate Bill 273 would have required you all to set aside 35% of your ARPA dollars, and that giving those to businesses to reimburse them. That was vetoed by the governor, and there was no veto override. So, second item I would mention, the major income tax bill, and I really only mention that for one reason, and that is to say that that included the marketplace facilitator provisions in an attempt to level the playing field between online retailers and businesses here in town. So that requires marketplace facilitators to collect and limit sales, compensate fees, transient guest taxes, and one fees. That's going to bring the state about $42 million here in the first year that will be effect. Next issue is property taxes. I'll mention two bills. First being Senate Bill 13, which you all have probably heard a lot about. I'm kind of tired of talking about it, but the good thing that it does, of course, is it repeals the tax lid. Not so great thing maybe is that it requires you all to do some more things in terms of transparency measures. So you're probably pretty well versed in that. I think yesterday you had an important deadline in terms of giving the county clerk notification if you're going to exceed the revenue neutral rate. So I would also add, we've included in our report, in the League of Municipalities has a great timeline on their website, an infographic that really walks you through the process much better than, than I did. The second bill I want to mention briefly is House Bill 2313. This provides for reimbursement of property taxes for certain business shutdowns or restrictions during a state of emergency. This does not impact COVID restrictions because it is not retroactive, but it's prospective only and goes into effect next January. Mention that to say we're not entirely sure how this plays out yet at this point, and there might be some unintended consequences, so we'll be watching for that next session as well. Last two issues I will talk about briefly. Want to bring up the abortion constitutional amendment that was passed by both chambers. This asks voters in the 2022 primary to decide if the legislature and not the Supreme Court can determine whether women have the constitutional right to an abortion. I mention this really for only one reason, and that is to say that it will play a pretty significant role about a year from now in the August 2022 primary. Lastly, I'll touch on school finance. Much debate, of course, this session about non-public schools and expanding school choice, which we expect to continue to be a big topic next session as well. The most important thing I would note is that the legislature fully funded K-12 education as outlined in the Gannon lawsuit for the third year in a row. So that wraps up kind of the top five, the big five issues. And so now we'll kind of talk about what to expect next session.
Yeah, and we note the importance of public education, and just for the record, we represent the Shawnee Mission School District, and so we've been following along as they've gone through the last legislative session, and so just wanted to make sure that was noted. As we get into preparing for 2022, the legislative session, there are some carryover bills and some issues that are you can go through the list of things that we reported on and put in that June 8th summary in particular, and most of those are going to be alive that weren't passed or stricken. But there are going to be two issues that are going to have an impact on how public policy issues are handled. And one is the fact that everybody in the State House is going to be facing election next year, and we're going to have a gubernatorial election, and that's going to have an impact on how and why and the conversation politically. That's just the nature of the legislature. The other issue that's kind of underlying a lot of that, and it's going to be one that will take place in the most mysterious process, redistricting. Redistricting is going to happen that will recalibrate all of the House and Senate districts as well as the congressional districts. And so there is already an interim committee that's begun the process of looking into that and putting together a process. There's a variety of ways that one can redistrict it, and we in Kansas do it the old-fashioned way by a piece of legislation that's passed. I will note the last time we did redistricting in 2012, a district courts judge drew the districts when the legislature didn't have judges or didn't have maps that were acceptable. So I think folks are trying to avoid that, but that's going to be a critical part because it has an impact on congressional delegation, has an impact on the local, on the House and Senate seats as well. So those are two underlying issues that are going to shape how lots of policy conversations take place. A couple things I would mention of legislation that we know that's coming that's going to have some significance. House Bill 2452 is kind of a county-wide issue. This is a piece of legislation that would allow the purchaser of a motor vehicle to pay the property tax in the county in which you would register that vehicle. And that's kind of an issue that has an impact on counties and cities that have car dealerships, frankly, and the sales of those, and in a place like Johnson County where folks come to buy vehicles, that sales tax, instead of staying in the county and the city, would be taken back to a county from which the purchaser registered a vehicle once it was taken to that county. So that bill was introduced late in the session. It is an interesting dynamic. There's nothing that probably highlights a rural-urban division in some ways more than that topic. So I don't know if that means it won't get any life, but it's certainly going to be something that we're going to be talking about. A bill that came up that had hearings is of interest to some influential people in the State House is Senate Bill 87, which removes the formula for distribution of county sales tax. And so the original bill eliminated a provision that a county was required through a formula to distribute sales tax to local jurisdictions, and they could do whatever they wanted with it. It came out of Atchison counties, had been probably the 4th year we've heard the bill, but there's growing conversation about implementing this. And the last idea that we left before the session kind of fell apart was a proposal from the Senate Tax Committee that the bill would allow for any future or new sales tax that the county commission would have the authority to determine that they wanted to not use the existing formula and collect those revenues. And they'd have to announce that 60 days before renewal of a sales tax or a new sales tax issue. So that's going to be something that we're watching and obviously has a significant impact on a lot of places. One other issue that we seem, and it comes back about every 10 years, and it's about 10 years back, eminent domain. There are property rights issues raise a lot of eminent domain conversations. There's a bill that was introduced at the end of the last session. It was 206, and it sets up a judicial court-based process for a structured appeal on eminent domain decisions, and requires a great deal of notice. And so this isn't just big projects, it's right of way. It's going to be a lot of smaller kind of things too, where that may take place. So we're going to probably have a very active conversation about eminent domain as well. The last thing I will mention on my part of the list is the commercial property tax issues. And I think there's probably a number on one hand of industries that have been impacted by COVID, and commercial real estate is one of those. And there's been an ongoing issue for a number of years about how the state and how counties assess, value commercial property. And the term of art that's been used for a while has been the dark store theory. Well, we know there was a district court decision this spring that ruled in favor of the commercial property owners and with regard to the valuation of that property. And that is likely to, not likely, it will stimulate some conversation about what is and what should be state policy with regarding to value commercial property, which will have an impact on counties and everyone for that matter. So, and there's an interim tax committee that's going to be looking at some topics, and I would not be surprised if that gets added to the mix. Mallory's going to wrap up with a couple of other things.
We're in the home stretch, I promise. Last 3 issues I would mention, the first being this notion of competition with government services. So as you'll recall, we testified in opposition to a bill this session, House Bill 2445. This was better known as the Health Club property tax exemption issue. So had a hearing, didn't really go anywhere, and then literally in the last minutes and hours of session, it was attempted, bundled into a tax bill on the Senate floor, and luckily that was pretty heavily defeated. So this is not going away. This is most definitely coming back. I would note that the legislative post audit is going to conduct a study on this issue of government and nonprofits competing with for-profit businesses. I would also note that the Special Committee on Taxation was approved to meet for 2 days this summer and fall, and I'm quite certain that they will probably also take up the topic. So don't forget about this issue. So next issue, medical marijuana. Passed the House for the first time pretty handily, I think about 80-40. The Senate did not take up the issue, but I expect that they will come back next year with their own bill that probably looks pretty different. So I think we're going to be starting at ground zero again with this issue. I bring this up to note one thing for municipalities in particular. The bill as it sits currently and as it passed the House, it does allow counties to opt out of the entire arrangement. So counties could prohibit growers, dispensaries, distributors while still allowing possession. Just no growing or selling in the county. Last thing I would mention, and that we'll definitely be hearing more about this summer, is the Spark Task Force. As you recall, probably this was the bulk of our reports over the summer and fall and into the winter last year. So the Spark Task Force, of course, determined how CARES dollars coming into the state were spent. A lot of those, were focused simply on immediately responding to the pandemic and the continuity of state operations. This round of Spark and the ARPA, American Rescue Plan Act dollars coming to the state are going to be focused on things like economic revitalization, behavioral health, connectivity, and early childhood development. I would note that with a little bit of a caveat though, because this is a kind of a new makeup of Spark, new committee membership and layout. And so there's still lots of logistical and functional things to work out before we really get into the details on those topics. So it could be several weeks or months before we really know how the Spark process is going to work. I would note also, just because the timeline for spending ARPA dollars is so much more drawn out than the CARES dollars, we really might not see some of these decisions made until next session or even after the 2022 elections, since you have, I believe, until December 2024 to obligate these funds and then December 2026 to actually expend the funds. So all that to say, stay tuned and we will be watching these discussions over the summer and fall and let you know if any opportunities that are pertinent for you all. So thank you. Happy to take questions.
Trent?
Thank you. Could you speak a little bit? I know it was briefly mentioned in the summary memo, but there wasn't. I know there's ongoing lawsuit about it. Could you speak to the changes in election law and kind of go over some of those?
Yes, happy to do that. There were two bills that were passed this session. Probably pretty fair to say they were controversial. They were vetoed by the governor, and then those vetoes were overridden. I'll mention the first one, House Bill 2183. It does several things, but I think of most of note is the fact that it prohibits a person from delivering anybody's advance ballot without written permission from that person. It also prevents the Secretary of State from extending the deadline for receiving advance ballots. So that is pretty significant. The other bill, House Bill 2332, it also does several things. I would mention that it probably most notably prohibits the governor, the executive branch, and judicial branch from altering any election laws. And it also requires the Secretary of State to obtain approval from the Legislative Coordinating Council, which is legislative leadership, prior to entering into any consent decrees. I would note that these have already been challenged by, I think, 3 or 4 different groups. I know the League of Women Voters. Who else has challenged these? Anyway, so this is also another one of those ongoing things that probably are not going to see resolution with anytime soon.
Ken?
With regard to Senate Bill 87, is the association, Kansas Association of Counties and the league on the same page for that or not?
I'm trying to recall the hearing, and I think, I don't think that the league is supportive of this clearly, and I don't think the Kansas Association of Counties, in my recollection, testified in favor of it either. It's one of those messy conversations that you don't necessarily want to have, but it's been elevated to this level. And I don't recall either one of them supporting the legislation.
Solly.
Yeah, thank you. I had one question about the legislative division of the post audit. And I know you touched on that they're looking at the government organizations competing with private businesses. But in their memo, you said the other piece was they were also looking at how local governments expended their CARES Act funding. And I was wondering if there had been any chat about what they're after with that, if there were concerns about the spending, or if they're just sort of doing a report on how it's being utilized in the state.
I think, and Stuart can correct me if I'm wrong, I think it was just a general want to see how the funds are being expended. I don't know if there was a red flag or anything that had come up. I have not heard when that is going to come out. I know that the LPA met maybe 2 weeks ago, and that was not their what they met about. So I would assume this is something that comes later in the summer or fall.
And I think it's fair to say that among the state elected officials and kind of looking at how, for example, Senate Bill 40 took some of the authority of public health officials away and gave that more of that authority to elected bodies such as you all or county commissioner to make decisions about public health. And then when they were watching the federal dollars, I think we've had, is it 6 billion come through the state, some of it going to local units, some of it going to the state. Part of what the legislature has done as well, and Mallory mentioned some of the restructuring of the Spark Oversight Committee for the ARPA money, the legislature and public members now have a majority on that body, because the idea is that the legislature it believes that they have the authority over how those dollars are spent, rather than the administration and employees. And so I think it fits into a general context that I don't think anybody thinks they're hunting for things, but I think there's a sense that there were several $1 billion that came down to local units of government, and they want to kind of have some look at how those were done. I know you all have done expensive reporting to I think when you ask to see these reports and they show up, you're going to be surprised, because I know everybody had to report to the county had to bundle that together. But that's just, I think that's part of it, is they just want to have a look to make sure that there's some, since it was a significant amount of money.
Okay, yeah, that's kind of what I was wondering, and about impacts on the ARPA process, if they might, meddle and it would be better to allocate and spend those funds more quickly, or if you really think we'll have that full timeline if the federal direction's clear enough on that.
I think, and Mallory can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we're slowing down this last round of the ARPA money to kind of be more, I'm not going to say more thoughtful, because it doesn't sound like it, but spend some more time looking for places that may have need that hasn't been addressed yet. And that's going to take, they are taking more time because they have more time, and they can, and the probably a majority vote of the Spark Executive Committee can put the brakes on now and take some time. So it's not going to be download of money like came for the last 18 months.
All right. Nick.
I know that you guys represent a number of other local municipalities. Is there anything that's come up in the legislature in the past year or so that's been specific to the city of Mission, or maybe where Mission was in opposition to some of the other people you represent?
I'm not sure. Lord, I don't know, were there any times when we were working on anything that there were conflicts? I don't. Yeah.
But nothing specific to the city of Mission that you guys brought up, right?
No.
All right. Anybody else have questions? All right. Well, thank you very much. All right. Next, special presentation. July is Parks and Recreation Month, which recognizes the work that staff does to create and maintain programs that are just vitally important to the quality of life in our community. It ensures the health of all our citizens and contributing to the economic and environmental well-being of the region. I would like to thank our Parks and Recs Director, Penn Almany, and his staff for the hard work that they do so that we all have the opportunities to enjoy our Parks and Recs facilities. You help us to be healthier and are an important part of our community. We are especially appreciative of your creativity that you had to demonstrate in this last year and your continued commitment to serving our residents through these challenging times. Penn, would you please come up and accept this proclamation on behalf of your department? Next, we have a proclamation. I am honored to recognize a longtime mission resident and business owner, Betty Benson, who is going to celebrate her 100th birthday. Betty has been a fixture in our community and a steadfast supporter of her Mill Haven neighborhood, the city of Mission, and in fact, all of Northeast Johnson County. Betty has taught and inspired so many at the Toll House while building a reputation as a caring teacher and a talented artist throughout Kansas City and beyond. Betty's passion for art has brought beauty to our world, not only through her artwork, but also through the talents of her many students. Betty will be celebrating her 100th birthday on July 24th, and we wish you all the best, Betty, and thank you for your contributions to Mission. Happy birthday. Our final special presentation is the community dialogue on the 2022 budget. Ms. Smith, would you please present this item?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I'm smart enough to. Okay, so show me how to do this. Emily told me I could get rid of that meeting as being recorded, but it doesn't. Now we go. Can I make that full screen or no? There we go. Okay, thank you. This evening, and historically in our budget process, we've kind of taken a pause before we get to a final recommended budget or proposed budget to the city council. To just, we want to be far enough along in the process, but not yet complete in that process, where we open up that opportunity to kind of share where we are and invite people to come speak with us or share thoughts or opinions about the 2022 budget. That's where we are in our process currently. The trick always is to get far enough along so that it's meaningful and the public has a sense of what we're looking at, but not so far along that they feel like it's always a done deal or the decisions have been made. So tonight, just briefly, I know obviously all of our other budget committee meetings and work sessions are open to the public. So this is information that has been available over the last several months and will continue to be available as we move toward final budget adoption in September. Most of this is not new information for you all as the governing body, and I will try to move kind of quickly through these slides and talk a little bit about really focused on the next and remaining steps in the process. So we look at, during our annual budget process, both the 2021 and 2022 budgets, our 5-year capital improvement program, other significant funds of interest in the city's budget, supplemental budget requests and recommendations. Stuart and Mallory touched on the intent to exceed the revenue neutral rate for the 2022 budget, which is an outcome of Senate Bill 13, impacting our processes this year, and then the remaining steps. This is just a reminder for our residents about who you all are and how they can contact you if they have questions or concerns or issues that they would like to discuss relative to the budget. And then we always like to just recap our organizational structure, starting at the top, obviously with the residents of Mission electing the mayor and 8 council members, to each from each of 4 wards. We have approximately 35 volunteers who serve in our various standing or advisory committees, Parks and Recreation Committee, Parks, Recreation and Tree Commission, Sustainability Commission, and the Planning Commission. And then we move into our organizational structure with our operating departments. And then there are a number of services that we contract for, including engineering services, attorney services, IT, solid waste. So this is just kind of a good overview and reminder for us and overview for the public about how we're structured and function within our organization. Why do we budget? I think in our last meeting, we talked that really the primary purpose is that it helps us to identify what our priorities, our goals, our objectives, and to find the right balance in the revenue and expense mix that's necessary to support both those daily operations and service delivery and our longer term, larger scale investment in our infrastructure. It helps through the budget document, through our budget conversations, to communicate those programs and objectives to the public. It helps us to plan and project future needs and challenges. Although we are only adopting a 1-year budget, we certainly do look forward and anticipate changes that might be on the horizon for us. And last but not least, it is required by state statute. So small details, but we would do this level and degree of budgeting in the absence of those statutory requirements. For 2022, the largest fund and probably where we spend the majority of our time in a single fund is the general fund. It is our fund which covers all operating departments and services, some limited degree of capital expenses, typically equipment for those operating departments. It is, as I mentioned, the largest single budget of the city's 19 funds, representing in the 2022 budget as it stands about 53% of the total annual city budget. It is also the place where we build and carry our primary reserve funds because we have the most flexibility within the general fund to allocate those to the various projects and priorities that the council and the community may have. We take a very conservative approach and always have in building our budget, both on the revenue and the expense side. Part of that is driven by the fact that we're budgeting six months in advance of when the fiscal year is going to start. And so a lot of things can happen in that period of time, particularly as we've seen in the last 12 to 18 months. And so we do build that conservatively, although as efficiently as we possibly can. And then we continue to monitor that through not only the final budget adoption process, but also through the balance of the fiscal year. Some of the assumptions that are underscoring the 2022 budget as it's been presented to date. Fortunately, we've seen sales and use tax performance remaining very strong. It was one of the things that really saved us last year as we saw some revenue declines as a result of the pandemic. We are starting to see some level of recovery in our community center revenues. We'll continue to watch that very closely in the coming months. But overall, for the 2022 budget, we're projecting an increase in revenues of about 4% over our 2021 estimated. And that aligns pretty closely. It's about the same. Our 2019 actuals are where we anticipate ending 2021. So we're just sort of, we've had a dip in 2020, as we all know, and we're sort of getting back to where we were a couple of years ago. So then on the expense side, we're estimating an overall increase of about 1% over our 2021 estimated budget. And I will footnote here that that does exclude our capital and supplemental requests, which I'll touch on a little bit later in tonight's presentation. General fund revenues are come from a variety of sources. When we look at the revenue streams that support that operating budget, sales and use tax comprise in total about 42%. In this chart, that includes both the 30% labeled as sales and use tax and then the 12% intergovernmental revenue. That's primarily the sales tax that is passed down to us through the county formula that Stuart and Mallory were just describing. So that comes in a variety of forms to kind of underpin what they were saying. If there are, we generate or we receive about $350,000 a year currently in sales tax, pass-through sales taxes from the county that could be up for renewal and could be subject to the provisions of that legislation. So that it does have potentially a significant budgetary impact for us. Next largest category of our budget is property tax, bringing in about 24% of our annual revenues. Parks and Recreation in the 2022 general fund budget is about 10%. That number in the past has been higher, and we hope again to grow and continue to see recovery in that area. Franchise fees, those are the 5% collected on all of the utilities. Fines and fees make up about 6% of our budget. Everything else, so plan review fees, building permitting fees, occupational licenses make up that other revenue category at about 4%. And in the 2022 budget, you see 6%, which is a transfer from other funds. And as we discussed at our last committee meeting, that represents approximately $751,000 in ARPA funds, which is our first half allocation, which I am happy to report was deposited in our account last week. So we have received that first half distribution, and we would receive the second half distribution a year from now. General fund expenses, we like to kind of look at that in a couple of ways by function. So by functional area or operating department, and you'll see, I think consistent with most other cities, public safety comprises the largest portion of our general fund expenses at 36%, and that includes the police department and municipal court. Public Works follows behind at about 26%. That is the Public Works Department and Community Development Departments. Parks and Recreation at 23%, and then administration, the legislative budget, and our general overhead, which is a budget that is a sort of a catch-all for those expenses that don't fit neatly into any other specific operating department or category. And again, as I mentioned, right now, those are the expenses in 2022 are estimated to increase about 1% over our 2021 estimated. The other way that we like to break down and look at general fund expenses is by character. And so we look at personnel, we look at our contractual services, we look at commodities, we look at debt service, and then we look at transfers out to other funds. You can see in 2022, there's a slight decrease in personnel expenses. That's somewhat uncommon to see because typically you have salary and benefit costs that outpace inflation and that represent the largest expenditure that you have. That's primarily driven by the reduction in the number of sworn full-time employees in the police department. You'll recall we had an increase in a previous budget year by 2 with the hopes of implementing a directed patrol unit, not been able for a variety of reasons to field that. So we've taken that off the table until some further point. So that's really the primary driver in that reduction in personnel expenses between this year and next year. We're always looking for ongoing opportunities for savings or cost efficiencies, particularly in contractual service line items. So we're looking at opportunities for partnerships. We're looking at opportunities to privatize various services. And we're exploring grant opportunities, although grant opportunities as they relate to our general fund operations are fewer and far between than they are on the infrastructure side. Commodities are those things which we buy, the things you can touch and feel, and you see a slight increase in the 2022 proposed budget at this point, and that's the result of price increases that we're starting to see in some of those commodities, things like fuel and asphalt. So not really significant, but again, something we keep an eye on. Capital outlay. Several years ago, we established an equipment reserve and replacement fund, and we've tried to fund our major capital equipment purchases, things like dump trucks and street sweepers and police cars and other things out of that reserve fund. And so that's why you see a little that decrease in capital outlay. You see a very significant increase in debt service between 2021 and 2022, and that is driven entirely by the debt service associated with the FCIP improvement that that we have been working on. Kind of the last thing that we look at when we consider our general fund, as I mentioned, this is the place where we build and carry our reserves or rainy day funds. The Government Finance Officers Association recommends no less than 2 months of operating reserves. The City Council currently has a policy of maintaining 25% of annual general fund revenues as your general fund reserve. Pleased to report that for the last several years, we have not only met that fund balance policy, but exceeded that fund balance policy. It is certainly one of the things that has helped mitigate the impacts of COVID over this last year, and provides us with the opportunity to talk about allocating those dollars to our additional priorities and projects. The appropriate level of general fund balance is dependent on a number of factors, including the potential for exposure to one-time large expenses, reliance of other funds, particularly those with debt service on sales tax revenues. Although we maintain appropriate debt service reserve in the funds where we are carrying debt service, and then potentially the impact on our bond ratings. We've seen as we've gone through bond issues in recent years that having that 25% fund balance and excess fund balance has certainly helped us communicate a very strong financial position to the bond rating agencies. And then it's important to preserve that reserve as other important revenues are assessed and evaluated. So for example, we know we will have a mail ballot election on renewal of our dedicated street sales tax coming up in September. And so having these reserve funds give us the opportunity to continue to move forward with some projects as we wait for an answer and through that process and others. Last thing in the general fund relates to our capital and supplemental requests. This is kind of the high level overview. Included in the packet is a much more detailed summary of the items that have been submitted for consideration as capital and supplemental requests, both for the 2021 year and 2022. We've tried to break those out. What we look at each year is which fund would they impact, and which year should they be funded in, and then what other alternatives that we've had. We've had very preliminary, as the council is aware, we've had very preliminary discussions around our capital and supplemental requests. We first presented those at the committee meeting on July 7th. I anticipate that this is an area where, as we move into our August committee meeting, where we will have the results and a presentation on our direction finder survey that was recently conducted, that will have that opportunity and that data to really then discuss these priorities that have been outlined in connection with the community priorities and goals and objectives. So that will be a better opportunity for us to look at and prioritize those. And I will say that as we put the 2021 budget together, we built a series of revenue models that helped us try to be positioned to react and respond to fluctuating revenue streams because of COVID-19. We have those in place and we're relying on those to a certain extent in this budget process, but I would say that more so in the 2022 budget, we're looking at sort of those release points, if you will, on the expenditure side. So how do we build and prioritize those things that are included in these capital and supplemental requests in a way that says we're ready to move forward with these now, or if we see more recovery in revenues or see greater reductions in expenses than we'd anticipated, then we know we've established that list. We know the next project or priority that we will go and sort of pluck off of that list. Any questions on the general fund? Kind of move on into the 5-year capital improvement program. Right now, we're looking at capital improvement program over a 5-year horizon. Actually, in many cases, internally, we're building out capital improvement plans that extend beyond that, closer to maybe 7 to 10 years. Capital projects, whether that's streets, stormwater, parks and recreation, public buildings and facilities, technology, vehicles and equipment, are often our largest or biggest ticket expenditures, difficult sometimes to manage in a single year's operating budget, sometimes may need to have debt financing considered as a part of their implementation. So we build those out into a multi-year plan. It also allows us to take those dollars that we're generating locally for particularly infrastructure investments and know how to best leverage those to secure county CARS programming for street maintenance, SMAC funding for stormwater maintenance, and other grants that may exist. So this slide really just represents a lot of the work that we've been focused on for the last 12 to 8 months in starting to be more specific and intentional in building out asset management program and plans. We are most furthest along in the street category, as we know, and that's part of what led the council to be positioned to make the recommendation to circulate the mail ballot or bring forward the mail ballot election in September. Stormwater falls closer behind, and then Parks and Recreation and these other categories. But it's important to just sort of keep these in mind and always be looking at the threats and opportunities that we have in each category. And it is a constant rebalancing and reevaluation of the priorities that we have. Right now, our focus is on 3 primary program areas: stormwater, funded by the stormwater utility fee, special assessment revenues, and drainage district revenues. The street program, funded by a gas tax distribution from the state, currently a 1/4 cent retail sales tax dedicated for streets, and then roughly the equivalent of 7 mills in property tax that is assessed in the general fund and transferred for street repair and maintenance. And that represents actually about 41% of the property tax that's collected in the general fund. So the council has made that commitment to transfer a significant portion of existing property tax revenues to this important infrastructure category. And then the Parks and Recreation revenues are currently a 3/8 cent retail sales tax and 1/3 of the alcohol tax distributions that are passed down to us through the state. For the 2022 budget, kind of expenditure highlights in these categories that are being discussed or proposed. In the stormwater category, Rock Creek Channel repairs just west of Reed's Road, ongoing stormwater maintenance, which we know we've talked a lot in recent meetings about sinkholes that form and our need to address those. We're still playing a lot of catch up in that category and hope to be able to get ahead of that at some point. And then stormwater debt service that has allowed us, we've made really from the period of about 2006 to 2011, we made about $30 million in total of stormwater improvements throughout the community. And obviously at that level, it required us to use debt financing to do some of that. So that's been an important investment in our stormwater system and taking some significant properties out of the floodplain. Most recently, we know the work that we did on the Rock Creek Channel behind the former Mission Bowl took several of those properties out of the floodplain, benefiting property owners along that section of the channel. On the street side, we have an emphasis on the annual residential street maintenance program. We have a proposed UBAS treatment for Johnson Drive, the section from Lamar to Rowe, which will include a reconfiguration. One of the important things, and some might say, well, we just redid that section of Johnson Drive in 2014. And one of the things that has been a really significant area of focus and emphasis for both council and staff has been, as we make these investments and upgrade the status of our roads, we need to make that continued investment in intermediate maintenance in order to prolong the life. And so this is, it's been longer than we think it has, and it is time for that section of the roadway to receive its intermediate maintenance treatment. But that will also include reconfiguration of the section between Lamar and Knoll from 4 lanes to 3. Design of Fox Ridge Phase 2, existing street debt service, and then miscellaneous repairs and sidewalk replacement, et cetera. On the Parks and Recreation side, the things that have been included for discussion purposes and consideration at this point include reconstruction of the tennis courts at Anderson Park, implementation of the Mohawk restrooms and pavilion, the potential for a dog park at Broadmoor, maintenance at the Powell Community Center and the Mission Family Aquatic Center, and then debt service on the Mission Family Aquatic Center, which will retire in 2023. So again, just like the capital and supplemental programs, although I will note that the dog park is an amenity included on the Parks and Recreation side here. But up to this point, the conversations that I think the council has had reflect the expenditure of funds out of the general fund as opposed to the Parks and Recreation sales tax for that project. Other funds in 2022, some important things to highlight. The Mission Convention and Visitors Bureau Fund, we do have our one hotel currently that generates transient guest tax revenues. Those revenues are used primarily to support the Mission Magazine, which we'll see when we get the full-blown Direction Finder results in a couple of weeks, is the #1 source of information for residents in our community. So that's been a good investment. And then we had previously, that had been a pass-through fund for family adoption in our Mission Business District group. We have transitioned those out. So the family adoption will have its standalone fund, be much more transparent. And then the Mission Business District has taken over administration of their own funds, actually beginning this year. We have a variety of TIF and CID funds. So anytime we enter into a redevelopment agreement that includes the use of various public incentives, we have to account for those in separate funds. The distributions out of those funds are controlled by those existing redevelopment agreements. And right now we have active TIF and CID funds for Mission Crossing, which is the Culver's Chick-fil-A Wellstone project, Cornerstone Commons, which is Natural Grocer, that project, which is a CID, and then the locale. The Special Alcohol Fund, statutorily, we receive, based on our population, a distribution from the state, and we are required to split that in 3 ways. We have a third of that is available as to go to the general fund. A third of that goes to a special Parks and Recreation fund and must be spent on Parks and Recreation improvements. And then a third of that goes into a special alcohol fund to be to support a variety of drug and alcohol counseling, recovery, et cetera, services. So it generates about $70,000 a year for us. Currently, we dedicate about $50,000 of that to United Community Services of Johnson County's Drug and Alcoholism Council, who receives and reviews and awards grants to a number of agencies throughout the community, and relieves us of the administrative burden of having to do that ourselves. We use about $15,000 of that to support the DARE program and education in our local schools. And currently about $30,000 of that goes to support our mental health co-responder program. One of the supplemental requests included that would also, if ultimately approved in the 2022 budget, would be an additional $50,000. And there is fund balance sufficient in this fund to cover that, to hire a second co-responder that would help support the needs for the city of Mission and the city of Merriam. And then our solid waste utility fund supports our residential trash recycling and yard waste program. It's a contract that the city has for all single family residential properties. residents currently pay about 85% of those costs annually, and that's assessed on the property tax bill. City pays roughly 15% of that with a subsidy from the general fund. And we are anticipating about a 3% increase in the 2022 contract. So we kind of think about things that we'll be considering in the meetings ahead. It's important to look at assessed valuation trends. And just, very quickly, it's important, I think, to look at the trends over a longer term view. So if we look at the top chart on this slide, we look at the assessed valuation and the changes in assessed valuation between 2011 and 2021. And so it looks like a fairly steady upward growth of assessed valuation. When you stretch that graph out to 2002, you see that we were in a period of actually declining property tax revenues for a fairly significant period of time. And it's always important as we look at that to kind of take that step back and understand that longer picture horizon. Our assessed valuation is estimated for the 2021 tax year to be just over 180 million. We are proposing, I think we talked about it at a last meeting, and I've got another slide, that revenue neutral rate. But our average growth in assessed valuation over the last 5 years has been about 7%. Over the last 10 years, that average growth has been about 4%. And again, that's where you start to pick up some of the years where we had declining property tax revenues. Our high point was 13% in 2018, a low of 2% in 2019. Estimated growth in 2021 is about 5%. And in this particular year, driven more by increases in commercial property values than residential property values. Stewart and Mallory talked about Senate Bill 13, which repealed the tax lid, but did provide and does require local taxing entities to go through a series of other notification requirements should they determine they want to exceed the revenue neutral rate in any particular budget year. So currently, the city of Mission's mill rate is 17.048. And so if you recall, about 7 of those mills, or the equivalent dollars, are transferred out to maintain our streets, leaving just over 10 mills available to support general fund operations. When the county clerk calculated our revenue neutral rate for the 2021 tax year or the 2022 budget, that was calculated at 16.3. If we were to look at exceeding that revenue neutral rate, that would generate about another $135,000 of additional revenue in the 2022 budget. So the difference for the average homeowner admission of about $22 a year, or $1.83 a month. At our July 7th committee meetings, the council expressed their intent at this point to exceed the revenue neutral rate, both for the city of Mission budget and the 2 drainage district budgets. That notice was provided in accordance with the statutory requirements to the county clerk. And so we will now move into the hearing process, and we'll touch on that when we look at the calendar. So this gives us the opportunity to exceed the revenue neutral rate, and the proposed budget is based on maintaining that current mill rate at 17.048. The council can, obviously, at the point you finally adopt the budget, you can't go higher than that, but you could go lower. And here is a slide which is obviously very difficult to read, and we can put the full size version in the packet. But one of the other things that's really important for us to look at, and we do consider each year when we put a budget together, is just the history of both our mill levy and various fees, including our utility fees. There's been, and this chart goes back and looks from 2002, but you can kind of see when we started in 2002, the mills that were being levied were just slightly more than 5. And so it helps to underscore, while having an incredibly low mill levy rate is something that gets great media coverage. It certainly, we're seeing some of the longer term impacts of deferred infrastructure maintenance, deferred maintenance of other things. So one of the things, and I really just point this chart out, is that, and you all know it, but I think it's important to reiterate as we share our budget with the public, is that the decisions around mill levy and utility fees are never easy for our elected officials. And part of that challenge comes in that we know that whenever we turn a knob or a dial in one area, we need to be sensitive to the kind of trickle down or overall impact that that might have. And so really try to look at that total burden for our businesses and our residents by combining property tax and utility fees and those kinds of things. So just point that out to say it's important to kind of keep all of those things in balance. And generally understand. The other thing we look at is, how do we compare to some of our neighboring communities? But part of that, you really have to look at what's the makeup, what's the underlying makeup in terms of their assessed valuation, the services, et cetera. So what steps do we have left in the 2022 budget process? Tonight is our city council meeting, and just kind of that quick overview to really get the formal presentation kind of on the record. Certainly if there's anyone this evening that had questions, we could take those tonight. I would say that there are several other opportunities in a less formal setting for us to probably have those conversations. The first one coming at the August 4th Finance and Administration Committee meeting. As I mentioned, we'll be reviewing results of the Direction Finder survey, the potential budgetary impacts of those, and starting to have more discussion around those supplemental capital and supplemental priorities and where those fit in a final recommended budget. And then we will have September 1st at our Finance and Administration Committee meeting will be kind of that final review and presentation. So we'll have another month and a half, 6 weeks or so to put kind of final touches, continued discussion. We also pass a budget resolution that outlines the policies that underscore and support that. I would say that because we've been able to stretch the budget process out this year, that one of the things that I would recommend and will plan to do over the next month is take a budget presentation to all of our boards and commissions. So we've sort of relied on them in the past to attend community dialogues and things, and I think it's important for us to build that back into our process. So we can get in front of them, share council priorities, and get feedback in that mechanism. So in August, we'll be planning to make those presentations to our advisory boards and commissions. And that at the September 15th City Council meeting, we'll have the formal hearings on the intent to exceed our revenue neutral rate and a public hearing on the 2022 budget. And we are required for the revenue neutral considerations to adopt the budget on that same night. And then we have until October 1st to certify our budget and submit it to the county. So how do you stay connected to the conversations that are going on in and around the budget or anything else that the council is working on? I think it's great. We're back to our in-person meetings. I think that always helps inform our conversations. We also are continuing to offer the opportunity to participate in those virtually. You can certainly visit missionks.org for a full calendar of meeting dates and times. Signing up for the Mission Monthly emails. You can do that by visiting our website and searching Mission Monthly, or you can follow us on a variety of social media outlets, including Facebook. We have City of Mission account, a Parks and Recreation account, a Police Department account, and a Market account, and then Facebook, and Twitter, Instagram, and Nextdoor. We've seen Nextdoor is really a very common way for neighbors to communicate. It's difficult in many instances for the city as an entity or organization to hop on and participate in those conversations. So as we try to monitor, but as we see things that are of significance or get elevated, certainly there are some other channels that those can come through to be addressed most efficiently. And that's the balance of my presentation for this evening.
All right. Any questions or comments for Laura? Ken?
I've been approached recently about some questions regarding the dog park, and I just wanted to have some clarification. As I understand it, our discussion during one of the work sessions that we had to do with the presentation that was done by Councilmember Hillary and Councilmember Schlesmarker with regards to the existing surplus of our balance from last year. Is that correct? And that we have basically earmarked $200,000 with the intent of this council to indicate its interest and support of a dog park. That preceded the hearing that took place with regards to specifically Broadmoor Park, where the dog park was to be situated. The question I have, I guess, is based on the hearing and based on the discussion, which unfortunately I could not attend, is there going to be some additional debate and discussion by the Parks and Rec Board about the findings or the response from the community during that hearing?
Um, I will say, yeah, there will be opportunities. So the request that council members Thomas and Schlesmacher brought forward at that work session was to consider, as you mentioned, committing $200,000 to construction of a dog park. You'll recall that there was a grant application that was due.
Wait a minute.
Sorry,
We didn't commit anything.
correct.
We put dollars into a budget,
Yes,
okay, which has not been approved.
correct.
Okay, so I just want to make sure
Yes,
there's, and I would say also that we had an initial meeting of the conceptual design of Broadmoor, which was the very first in a series of meetings that we're going to have on that, on what's going to happen to Broadmoor. So I know there are a lot of, I'd had a lot of contact with people. We are on a track, but we're on the first step of that track. And in fact, I think Laura is going to put on the August 4th agenda for our committee meetings, discussion on this item. So I want people to know that there's no decision been made. We had an initial meeting with neighbors where in a public forum. There's going to be more meetings. There's going to be more discussion. Laura is going to share all of the feedback that's been sent in. So just want to make sure that we're all in the same place, that it's the beginning of a process.
That's precisely why I wanted to bring that up,
Okay.
because I want to make sure that we're clear on where we are with regards to this, because I think there is some misunderstanding in general as to where things stand. So I think it's important for us to lay that on the table. I know that several of you have probably been contacted with regards to this and attended the meeting. And so I want to make sure that we understand that there's still some opportunity for this to be reviewed. And I also think there's an opportunity for the Parks and Rec Commission to have a chance to have discussion around this.
absolutely. And you're right. I mean, and if you look, when you're looking for it in the budget, in that capital and supplemental list that we were discussing earlier, that includes a whole variety of things, dump trucks and all of that, there is a placeholder for that $200,000. And so that is the list, as I mentioned, for goals, objectives, priorities that we continue to work through in the next several weeks through this budget process, and quite frankly, beyond this existing budget process.
But also, I think one of the things that has to be highlighted is the thing of at Broadmoor, that statement in the budget that's been provided.
Yes,
that
and I
at
can certainly
Broadmoor
amend that.
is still needs to be ferreted out as to whether that's going to be feasible or not.
Nick?
Yeah, I think this is something that's been ongoing for about 6 years now at this point. I think, we got some feedback at that meeting, and it's important to listen to that. I didn't hear a single person, though, that came to the meeting that wanted to complain about this, give us any other alternatives for what we should do. And I just worry that no matter where we suggest anything like this, we're going to get that same kind of response, right? But those plans didn't just come up out of thin air either. Those plans did already go through the conceptual park design stuff with the Parks and Rec group, right? So it wasn't like they were just brought up out of thin air to include that stuff. And those were the 3 designs that were presented and discussed at that meeting, and that's where that came from originally. So it's not like this hasn't already gone through some of that initial stuff. I think there's some more fact finding that needs to be done and some more planning and stuff that needs to be done. But this has been ongoing for 6 years too. And I think the Direction Finder survey will really help guide maybe some of the other conversation on that. And we'll see what that says. I'm eagerly anticipating the results of that. So some more discussion needed, but I also want to just throw out there that I didn't feel like that discussion at the meeting was very positive, and nowhere along this whole 6-year process that I've been involved in has anybody come up with any kind of good alternatives on where we could maybe do this. And Broadmoor Park's our best option. And if it doesn't work there, it doesn't work there, but we'll have that further discussion, I guess, going forward.
All right, we don't, once again, I don't think tonight is the night to get into that. We have a process for our budget. We have a process for the budget items. We have a process for our parks design. So we're going to have multiple meetings, multiple discussions, and there's a place to have all this discussion. Look at the survey results, look at the feedback we've been getting. Yes, Kristen.
I agree with Ken. I think we should stricken Broadmoor Park specifically from that. Thank you.
Any other questions about the budget? All right, then that concludes item 2 on our agenda. We'll move on to item 3, which is issuance of notes and bonds. And we don't have any items related to the issuance of notes and bonds this evening. So we'll move on to item 4, our consent agenda. Our consent agenda does have 3 items on it tonight. Our council committees did meet on July 7th and fully discussed each of these items. The committees agreed that the items listed on our consent agenda are routine enough to be considered under a single motion. If a council member or a member of the public would like any of these items removed from the consent agenda, now would be the time to make that request. Hearing none, I would entertain a motion to approve.
Mayor, I move the city council adopt the consent agenda as printed, items 4A through 4C.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion or comments? Hearing none, Audrey, please call for the vote.
Inman.
Aye.
Laura.
Aye.
Davis.
Aye.
Thomas.
Aye.
Kring.
Aye.
Boltinghouse.
Aye.
Rothrock.
Aye.
Schlossmacher.
Aye.
Motion carried. Thank you.
That concludes item 4. Moving on to item 5, public comments. If any members of the public would like to make a comment on an item that's not included on this agenda, now would be the time to do that. If you are participating through Zoom, please either add your comment in the chat feature and it will be read aloud, or note that you would like to speak and we will call on you shortly to make your comments verbally. Please remember that your comments and questions are visible to everyone in the meeting. If you are part of our in-person group tonight, please raise your hand and stay seated, and we will call on you to come to the lectern to make your comments. When you make your comments, please state your name and the city of residence for the record. Yes, please come forward and state your name and city of residence.
Hello, my name is Anna Leary, and I'm a resident of Mission. I was appointed to the Parks, Recreation, and Tree Board in 2011, and I am currently the chair of that commission. In the past decade, I have devoted every 3rd Monday of the month to meeting with some very wonderful people to work on our parks and recreation. It is a very broad task that we do. We learn about chillers and pool liners and how thick mulch should be, and branding and slide safety and trash pickup and plaster casting and how to fill Easter eggs. Much like the rest of our city employees, we kind of step up and do what needs to be done, and we really appreciate that about Mission. In 2015, we completed a park master plan. This was a major step for our PRT. Never before had the City of Mission had that sort of tool. We began to use that tool to identify and categorize needs for our outdoor parks. Looking at usage patterns, looking at deficits in our parks, looking at maintenance, finding the positive parts of these parks. Once again, this is something that was never sat down and done before for our city parks. As we did this process, we started to encounter roadblocks to this improvement. One of those roadblocks we discovered was that there is no consistent city funding for our outdoor parks. Our MFAC, our community center have definite line items in your city budget. Outdoor parks do not. The other major roadblock we had in 2015, there were no outdoor park employees. No one was dedicated to look after our parks. I'm happy to report that this year, despite COVID and all the other crazy going on, we have hired our first dedicated outdoor parks employee. Such a thrill. We have created consistent signage across all of our parks. And for those of us who've been on the board for a while, it's like seeing your little kid grow up. All of a sudden we have connectivity. We have this beautiful symbol for our city. It's a small thing, huge for some of us. Many of our parks have gained new sponsors through our Adopt a Park program. This was a program, once again, that we generated from scratch. Very proud to say that Penn has really put a face on our parks and making a huge amount of difference. And we have made major repairs to our play equipment, installed new benches, and planted more trees than we ever had before, just in this crazy COVID year. We're still working on figuring out funding, and we're still working on long-term plans. We have chosen through our deliberations, through all of this work we have done, to focus our efforts on getting restrooms in as many parks as we can. This has been a long time call of residents. It has been somebody who's lived next to a park who's seen those porta potties go up in smoke several times, who think, oh my gosh, what would a real restroom do for our city? Huge. We have also chosen to focus our work on Mohawk Park, a park that still has the footprint of the school that was originally there. Still has the old fences up from when it was a Shawnee Mission school building. It's time to look at these parks and see what we can do for them. Meanwhile, as we're working on all of these, juggling our balls, keeping them moving, the council members have kind of passed us by. And the PRT was not consulted with this suggestion to fund a dog park in the 2022 budget. I personally heard about the proposal to fund a dog park from reading the Shawnee Mission Post. Many other PRTs were unaware when they showed up in our meeting Monday night that this had happened and had been put in the budget. PRT is in the process of working with Confluence to create plans that fit all of our parks. We have 5 parks we're looking at. We are not just looking at Broadmoor Park. It is a process that has a timeline, it has some big goals, it has some things we have never done before. One of the things I've learned from working with Confluence, and I feel lucky to be a part of that process, is that they kind of have a driving purpose that they identify before they start every meeting with you. One of the things they emphasize every time they meet is do it right the first time. Do not create a park, do not create an amenity, do not create something in your city that over time is going to have to be redone later. They stressed connectivity, community, inclusiveness, and does it make sense? And I'm going to add to that, can we maintain it? A dog park is a challenging amenity. I've sat in on the task force. I get the details behind it, and the devils are in those details. You cannot just build a dog park and forget it. It is not simply putting up a fence for our city. There are no details in the money that you have earmarked. I don't know what you're spending on it. I don't know what size this park is. I don't know if it has parking or shade or plumbing, what kind of turf it has, who's picking up trash, who's keeping it healthy and maintained, who is using this park, and who's going to staff it. Do we have employees for that? Our experience in talking to other area dog parks and other cities who have created this amenity, that there is not enough money in $200,000 to do any of that. And it is certainly not enough money to reconfigure Broadmoor Park to put something like that in it. So I'm here to ask you to work with us members of PRT. Make my third Mondays worthwhile instead of just jumping over my head. Take the time to understand the difficulties and the limitations that have been put on us as a park board and as a recreation facility and as a member of this city. Learn about the history, learn about our goals for the future, and learn about how we can support even better parks. I'm going to request that you remove the entire earmark for that $200,000 for a dog park. Help the PRT support building restrooms in our parks. Help us make that long-term plan. Give us the grace to continue the process we have started. And thank you for thinking about everyone as we move forward with our parks. I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Ann.
Mr. Mayor?
We're not going to have a debate.
I just wanted
Okay.
to know if Ann was speaking in her personal capacity or as chair of the Parks and Recreation Board, if we could just get clarification on that.
Oh, sure, this is my personal capacity.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else, a member of the public, want to address an item that's not on the agenda? Hearing none, we'll move on then to item 6, action items. From the Planning Commission, we don't have any of those, so we'll move on to item 7, committee reports. All of the items that were considered by the committees this month were placed on the consent agenda for approval. As a result, neither Councilmember Kring or Councilmember Boltonhouse have reports to provide at this time. So we'll move on to item 8, unfinished business, which we do not have any. So we'll go to 9, new business. We do have one item under new business, which is the Millhaven Homes Association picnic at Mohawk Park. Audrey, will you please update us on this item?
Thank you. Millhaven resident Chris Linnane reached out to the city about an event at Mohawk Park for the HOA. This will be an ice cream social. Families can bring food, alcohol is going to be there, or families can bring in alcohol, and then there's going to be a live band. We contacted ABC, Department of Revenue. Since there is going to be no money exchanged in this process, there's no tickets sold, and they're not providing the alcohol. It is purely bring your own. They did not require a state license from them. However, because of municipal code, it is still considered the consumption of alcohol on public property. And so the council would need to make that exception in order for them to host the event and allow residents to bring their own alcohol. And that is about it, unless there's any questions.
All right, I would entertain a motion.
Mayor, I move the city council approve an exception to allow residents to bring their own alcoholic beverages to Mohawk Park for the Millhaven Family Picnic hosted by the Millhaven Homeowners Association.
We have a motion, a second. Any comments or discussion? Yes, Ken.
Does the city have any liability in regards to this issue? Thank you.
Any other? All right, seeing none. Audrey, please call for the vote.
Thomas.
Aye.
Davis,
Aye.
Schlesmacher,
Aye.
Rothrock,
Aye.
Boltinghouse.
Aye.
Kring,
Aye.
Inman,
Aye.
and Flora.
Aye.
Motion carried. Thank you.
All right, that concludes new business. Moving on to item 10, comments from the city council. This is an opportunity for comments from our council members. Does anyone have anything they would like to share? Debbie, then Trent.
We had a Ward 3 meeting last Thursday evening. 5 people in Ward 3 attended that meeting, and the theme of the meeting ended up being the dog park. The rationale for bringing this up is, in concert with that meeting, I received a letter from a neighbor of Broadmoor Park that wanted her comments read. Her name is Rebecca Cease. She lives in Ward 3, right down the street from the park. I want to make sure that this particular document that is in letter form gets to be a part of the public record, and I will be handing that to the Parks and Rec Director, Penn Almany. And further discussion will be held during the August 4th committee meeting, where we will follow up with those kind of comments. They also are in concert with the Broadmoor meeting, and we'll go forward with the August 4th meeting. But I wanted to make sure Rebecca's letter got put as part of the public record. Again, it's going to Penn Almany, and we'll move forward at August 4th. And I hope Rebecca can come to that meeting and present her thoughts in concert with her letter. Thank you.
And it will be a part of the documentation that is presented at the August 4th committee meeting.
Yes, we need to talk about, we'll be talking about direction finder, and I think this at some level, what we probably want to think about is, do we want to continue? It will be included with all of the comment cards and emails and other information that has been submitted following the Broadmoor Park conceptual park planning meeting. So it'll be part of that record and available publicly. We may want to, there may be another opportunity. We may want a standalone work session, depending on how we want to tackle this issue.
All right, Trent and then Solly.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was just going to inform the public that we have a Ward 1 meeting tomorrow at 6 p.m. at the bar, and Hillary and I will be there, and hope to see everybody there. Thanks.
Solly?
I guess I just wanted to thank Chief Laura, Officer Eddings, and our mental health co-responder. I talked to a resident over the weekend who just needed a little more help getting connected with services, and Chief jumped right on that, and our co-responder and Officer Eddings were able to respond to that resident and help get him to a better place. And so just really happy about that, and glad to see increased funding for our co-responder program in the proposed budget.
Ken?
I would like to also announce that we have a Ward 4 meeting on August the 10th at 7 o'clock. And so that's coming up. I did want to take this time.
Ken, where will that be? Oh, okay.
Okay. I think that we need, as a council, to kind of take stock at this point in time on the fact that we have decided to have representative liaisons to our commissions and committees. And that's an important function that we determined needed to be present at all times, both in terms of communication to and from those appointed groups. I do think it's important for us to have opportunity for the appointed groups to come and periodically submit their reports to us. I know that we've had reports from the Sustainability Committee, and I appreciate you being here as chair of the PRT to come and speak and share your thoughts as well tonight. I was under the impression when we had the discussion about the dog park, being that I am not a liaison to any of the existing committees, that this was being brought forward with the full knowledge of both the staff and the commission. And I was kind of surprised when I learned today that that was not the case. And because of that, I think that while one moment, please. While I voted in favor of, it was actually, I would say it was a vote, it was more of a sense of the council that took place with regards to support of the dog park. It was also a commitment that since we have surplus from prior budget, that this is something that could be dedicated for that purpose. But it also preceded a formal hearing about Broadmoor Park being the site, which had been scheduled. And I think that that was premature, and it was evidenced by the actual discussion, which I could not witness. So I think that we have to be mindful as a council that there is a process, that process needs to be adhered to, and that surprises are not very well taken or accepted. And I felt that this was somewhat of a surprise, not only to me, to maybe some other council members, but it was also a surprise to staff, and it was definitely a surprise to the appointed group that has responsibility for this. So I would hope that from here forward, we're mindful of the process that we've established and try to follow that. Thank you.
All right, anybody else? Okay, Hillary, then RC.
Yeah, I'd just like to respond to that
Okay,
comment.
wait a minute. This is not time for debate. Okay,
I'm
this
not
is
looking for debate. I
well,
just want
but this is not a back and forth. This is time for you to make
Ron,
your comments.
I
At
apologize.
August 4th, we are going to get into this in detail. So now is not the time to have a back and forth on this subject. So is there anything else on other topics?
I think it needs to be clarified that that was presented
Okay.
to the Parks and Rec Board. before
August
that was
4th,
brought
we
up.
will have this whole thing, we'll have this whole, or a special work session, whatever staff thinks is the best means, because there's a lot of emotion running on this subject, a lot of opinion. So I think it deserves the time to spend on it and to focus on it, and to do it in pieces, bits and pieces, I think is not going to do us justice.
Ron, can I have 1 minute?
Yes.
Thank you. Just in response, I think we attempted at the work session to make very clear that we were bringing this out of process. We recognize that very clearly in our memo. This was out of process. We well-informed staff. And it was because we felt like it couldn't get traction in normal process. And so we asked the council to consider it out of process, just to continue the conversation in the budget process. And so that was really our goal in the work session. There was receptiveness. Obviously, we had the challenging Broadmoor meeting, which I would say it was probably 50-50 from what I heard in public comments in terms of pro and con. And the dog park plan in relation to Broadmoor was presented to the Parks, Rec, and Tree Commission back in February. And I just think that's an important note as part of the entire conceptual planning process. And so we didn't see this out of step of anything, more just we would like to expedite that piece from 2023 to 2022 using excess fund balance, not using PRT funds. So we really see this, I see this as outside of the Parks and Rec arena.
Okay,
Thank you, Mayor.
RC?
Just a reminder that we are having the Mission Community Food Pantry tomorrow from 4 to 6, and then also the Harvesters mobile food distribution on Saturday, the 31st, at the Shawnee Mission North parking lot.
Anybody else? All right, seeing none, that concludes then item 10. Item 11 is the mayor's report. I don't have one, so we'll move to item 12, city administrator's report. Ms. Smith.
I have a fairly long list this evening, but I'll try to move through it very quickly. Just a reminder that we've been taking full advantage of work sessions through the course of this year, but we do not have a work session next Wednesday on July 28th. So we get to have a free Wednesday evening, but on August 4th, we will be coming back for our committee meetings, at which time we've talked about it on several occasions tonight. Representatives from ETC will be here to present, to make a formal presentation on the Direction Finder survey results. Very pleased. I know they've mentioned to us casually, but we had 560 responses to the survey, They guaranteed 400 through that process. So anxious to look and see and really start to dive into that for a variety of reasons. We had earlier this week, we had a kickoff for the FCIP projects with the CTS team. And really all of the folks internally who will be responsible for managing various components of that project, whether that be actual physical implementation or financing or any of that. It was really exciting and energizing. Quite frankly, we talked about the vendors. That was kind of our first deeper dive as a staff into the vendors who've submitted the proposals, and we were really starting to map out implementation strategies and timelines, which we hope to be able to come back and present to you all soon, so that you'll have an understanding, and then building a communication plan for the public, particularly for the patrons as the projects impact this facility, but then also taking that opportunity to really build out that communication plan as we upgrade the streetlight network to the LED system. So I know CTS at a previous meeting had said everything would be wrapped up by January, which gave me a little bit of a panic. The schedules look more like March or April of next year. So part of that is due to long lead times on a lot of the equipment. So excited to see that really kick off. We are talking internally, and we'll bring back some options to you for dates for the reschedule of our Mission Summer Family Picnic. Let's see. We are working, I hope to be able to report maybe later next week. We're working with the Gateway developers on when they anticipate being back in front of the council with the information that was requested by you in order to allow us to have the most productive meeting as possible. Couple of staff updates. I sent an email to you all. Officer Flair beat me to it on his personal social media page, but our Jay Flair has announced his retirement effective September 1st. Be a tremendous loss for us and the entire community, but he didn't spill the beans on his next set of adventures, so I'm going to let him do that as well. But we're excited for him, and we also recently lost a couple of officers to another department here in the metropolitan area. The chief we've hired one. She is currently at the academy, but we're continuing to look at trying to keep our police department fully staffed, which is again becoming a challenge for particularly those of us in smaller agencies. And then just announced yesterday that our city planner, Caitlin Service, has accepted another position and will be leaving us. Her last day will be August 2nd. She's accepted a position to be a planner with the Great Rivers Greenway in St. Louis. So fantastic opportunity for Caitlin, but she has, and even though she's only been here a short period of time, has made really important and tremendous contributions for us. And last but not least, we will have here in the next probably 36 hours or so our first launch of information on the renewal of the street sales tax. We've been busy building out the website, some other important informational tools. So look forward to that. As we talked about during the budget presentation, there will be a special mail ballot election. Mail ballots will be out the first part of September, due back September 21st. And this is a really integral part of our street funding system. And more information to follow again, but I did want to make a reference. We will be holding a town hall meeting relative to that sales tax on August 17th, which is a Tuesday. We had originally thrown out a date earlier, but it was the night before school starts for the Shawnee Mission School District, and we thought that might impact attendance. So we'll be here at the community center, I believe at 7 p.m., but we'll be getting the word out, broadcast very widely for that. And I think that is all I have this evening.
All right.
I have a question.
Yes, Debbie?
Just a quick question, Laura. As we move forward and we're looking at departments and filling vacancies, I would be really interested, other than geographic replacement or salary, I'd kind of like to know if we have exit interviews, if they're telling what kind of things they may be lacking here that they're looking for somewhere else, unless it's $20,000 more a year. I'd be real interested in knowing those, because I think, collectively over the years, we've lost people and for a variety of reasons, but it would be, I think, helpful for us to know if there's something else we could be doing.
Yes, so we are conducting exit interviews regardless of the level of position and sharing those back. We've not seen anything that has caused significant concern, but absolutely, if that were the case, we would certainly bring that to the council's attention. But we are conducting those.
RC?
Just to add just a little bit, and it's not a question, but just something to think about. I'd really like to see in the future us have discussions around not just the exit interviews, but having employee surveys of just general culture and what's keeping them here and what they appreciate about employment here. So.
Anybody else? All right, then that concludes item 12. Item 13 is an executive session, and we do have a need for an executive session this evening, which will be regarding a personnel matter of non-elected personnel. The governing body and those individuals named in the motion will adjourn to executive session for the allotted time. When that time expires, the governing body will reconvene to do one of the following: either extend the time required for discussion and return to executive session, or continue with our regular legislative meeting. As a reminder to the public, the governing body may take no binding action in an executive session. I would entertain a motion.
Mayor, I move the city council recess to executive session under the personnel matter of non-elected personnel, exception KSA 75-4319B1. Also attending the meeting will be City Attorney Dave Martin. The open meeting will resume in the conference room at 9:15.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
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 We're in executive session. We're going to go next door. perfect. Let the record reflect, it's 9:15 and we are back from executive session. Before we adjourn tonight, I want to share with the public that the video from this meeting will be available through a link on our website, missionks.org. There being no further business tonight, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
My second? We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned.